To analyze the situation better, we are joined from Moscow by narrative strategist Tatiana Kukhareva. Thank you for joining us. Now, Washington, Iran and Oman are apparently reaching an agreement on the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think that a deal is genuinely within reach, or is it just too early to say right now?
Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I think I would advise to not be extremely optimistic about any deal at this moment, because first of all, we've already had the memorandum. We were very excited about it, and then it fell apart just as spectacularly as it happened. So at this moment in time, there are signals that the US is kind of throwing, somewhat throwing a couple of bones in terms of the lifting some sanctions, but the biggest issues remain unaddressed, and the biggest issues in this conflict, they still will be the same. That is going to be the issue of uranium enrichment first and foremost, that I don't think Iran is going to compromise on after all these years. And there are several other important issues that are still not being addressed. In the meantime, the profits that the US has been making from the Strait of Hormuz uncertainty are just so significant that it doesn't look like they're interested in resolving this issue at the moment.
And do you think those profits are the reason we keep getting these mixed messages coming out of the White House? One minute they're going to hit Iran hard, the next minute they're in talks. Are they buying time here?
Well, first of all, we've seen it for years now. Donald Trump personally is so masterful in manipulating social media and manipulating the markets in this respect. That is a very important point for everyone to see, that every time he does say something, the markets react. And he's been, it's also part of his negotiation technique that he's been very true to. He hasn't changed it. Making those contrary statements in order to kind of create levers in the negotiations. But obviously, yes, of course, I mean, the amount of money that we're talking about here is just way too significant to kind of refuse this just like this. And on the other hand, there's obviously also the political part to this, and the political part also, the possible timeline, if this whole gamble will lead to the gains that Donald Trump wants to make for the party in terms of the midterms, and in terms of turning this into a success, that timeline is further ahead, because right now we're still very much in summer. The elections are in November. So in terms of that timeline, it makes sense to have any significant progress closer to the election.
And we had an analyst on earlier that was saying, you talked about the markets, and we had an analyst on earlier saying that, the markets don't move so much when Trump speaks. It's more when the Iranians speak, because they seem to believe the Iranians more and take their word for it. Would you disagree with that then?
Oh, absolutely, because it was bound to happen. The markets still do move. They just don't move as much as they used to. And well, that was to be expected, because you can't do the same thing for 6 years if we're taking the first term, and he was behaving very much the same during the first term as well. So then we had kind of a break during the Biden presidency, and then we came back to this kind of statements that come out of Donald Trump's social media. So the markets were bound to kind of become more cautious in terms of huge movements. They still do move, and it makes also perfect sense in terms of the narrative. Iran has stayed very consistent. There was nothing, and I don't honestly see any big change in the future, because for them, they're on the defensive in this campaign. They have their position. Their position has been the same for a long period of time. You know, they want to be able to enrich uranium. They want to have some sort of guarantees for their security. So when they speak, the market sees consistency. The market sees something that is trustworthy in that respect.
Talking about narratives, it sounds like what you're saying is that Iran has had the stronger narrative here throughout the course of this war. Are they winning the sort of propaganda war, would you say?
Well, that is kind of, you know, again, that's a very good question. The problem is the percentage of kind of world media and the level of loudness that we can attribute to American media compared to, so that statement would differ from country to country, from state to state. The narrative in the West has been that Iran is sort of this existential threat because, you know, we all remember even if we go down as far as, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu bringing the beautiful drawings of the bomb to the UN General Assembly. So the narrative that Iran is building a nuclear weapon and that this weapon is kind of unavoidably directed to the West has been around for so long that it's kind of, you know, enshrined in the somewhere deep inside the brain of an average news consumer. In the meantime, within this conflict specifically, you know, I think that it's easy to combat Trump in terms of the narrative when we're not talking about the domestic market, you know, because obviously on the domestic market in the US, that's a very different story. Anywhere outside, specifically in the global south, I think that the Iranian position has been a stronger one. And also, you know, the countries, the states that make up the global south have seen not just what Washington says, but what it does specifically in the region, specifically if we're talking about the Middle East. And I think that in the Middle East, for instance, the actions do speak louder than words tenfold.
Tatiana Kukhareva joining us from Moscow. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us.